Imagine you're driving down a deserted highway. The only sound is the hum of your engine and the soft flicker of headlights cutting through the darkness. But suddenly, something appears in the road, something that defies all logic and sends a chill down your spine. Whether it's an eerie figure lurking in the shadows or an unsettling feeling that you're not alone, night drives hold a unique terror. In today's video, we'll explore 5 true night drive horror stories that will make you think twice about hitting the road after dark. Story 1. The Woman on the Overpass.
It was late, well past midnight, and I had been on the road for hours. The highway stretched out before me, long and desolate, with no sign of life for miles. My hollow headlights cut through the darkness, but everything outside the beams felt like an endless void. I'd been trucking for years, so long hauls like this didn't bother me much anymore. But something about that night felt off. I had just passed mile marker 72 when I saw her. A woman standing on the overpass ahead, completely still. I squinted, trying to make out more details, but she wasn't moving. Just standing there, her hands gripping the rail as she looked down directly at me. I slowed down. She was alone, middle of nowhere, no car in sight. Maybe she was stranded. Or worse, thinking of jumping. I couldn't just drive past without checking. I pulled over, engine rumbling, as I came to a stop just beneath the overpass. My heart pounded as I opened the door and stepped out, the cool night air hitting me. I craned my neck up, but she wasn't there anymore. The overpass was empty. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. Maybe she moved when I stopped, or maybe my eyes were just playing tricks on me. But then I caught something in the corner of my eye, a movement in my rearview mirror. I turned slowly, and there she was, standing in the middle of the road, right behind my truck. I froze. My hand tightened around the door handle. She was much closer than before, and something about the way she stood, rigid, almost unnatural, made my stomach churn. Her face was still in shadow, but I could feel her eyes locked on me. My instincts screamed at me to get back in the truck, but my body refused to move. Against all better judgment, I called out, "Are you okay?" No response. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, but she didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. The stillness of her was unnatural, like she was a statue planted there just to watch me. I backed up toward the door, my heart hammering in my chest, and just as I was about to jump back inside the cab, she vanished. 1 second she was there, and the next, gone, like she had never been standing there at all. My blood ran cold. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and floored the gas. The truck roared back to life as I sped away from the overpass, glancing nervously into my rearview mirror. Nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My heart raced, fingers gripping the steering wheel tighter than I'd ever held it before. As the road stretched on, mile after mile, I told myself I was overreacting. It was late. I was tired. People see weird things when they're exhausted, right? Just as I was starting to calm down, my headlights flickered. The radio crackled with static, cutting in and out. My truck began to slow, no matter how hard I pressed on the gas. Panic surged through me as I pulled over to the shoulder. I checked the gauges, tried turning the engine off and back on, but nothing worked. The truck had stalled. I sat there, in the silence, the only sound my own heavy breathing. I reached for my phone to call for help, but as I did, I saw it again. Her, in the rearview mirror. She was standing right behind the truck, closer than before. her face still hidden. But this time, she was moving. Slow, deliberate steps, getting closer and closer to the cab. I fumbled for my phone, hands trembling as I tried to dial for help, but the screen flickered and went black. I was completely alone. She was nearly at the back of the truck now, her hand reaching out toward the trailer. I couldn't see her face, but I could feel her eyes on me, watching, waiting. I slammed the lock button on the door, heart pounding in my throat, and as she reached the cab window, she stopped. A long silence stretched between us. I didn't dare move, barely even breathed, as I waited for her to make the next move. But instead of knocking, she just stood there, her hand resting on the glass, almost like she was listening for something. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she turned and walked back into the darkness, disappearing into the night. My truck roared back to life on its own. The lights flickered back on, the engine growled, and the radio crackled with a burst of static before returning to normal. My hand shook as I gripped the wheel, hitting the gas as hard as I could. I didn't look back again. I drove for hours, not stopping until I reached the next town. Even now, I can't explain what happened that night. I don't know who she was or what she wanted. All I know is, when I pass that overpass now, I don't stop. I don't even look. Because I'm afraid if I do, she'll be there again, waiting for me. And next time, I might not get away.
Story 2. The Phantom in the Fog.
It was one of those nights where the fog rolled in so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead of you. I was driving back home from a late shift, exhausted, just trying to stay focused on the road. The highway was dead quiet, and the world outside my windshield felt like it had disappeared into a wall of white mist. I remember thinking how eerie it all felt. The stillness, the isolation, the kind of night where you almost feel like the only person left in the world. I was driving slow, barely pushing 30 when I saw it. At first, it was just a dim glow in my rearview mirror, headlights far back, cutting through the fog. I didn't think much of it, just another driver making their way through the night. But then the lights started getting closer, fast. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could see them closing in, way too quickly for these conditions. I checked my speed, still crawling along, but the headlights were almost on top of me now. My heart started racing, and I thought, what the hell is this guy doing? Is he trying to cause an accident? I decided to pull over, figuring I'd let the idiot pass and get on with my drive. I steered to the side, my tires crunching against the gravel shoulder. The lights loomed large behind me, bright, blinding almost. But as soon as I came to a stop, the car vanished. Just like that. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. There was nothing behind me. No headlights, no car, nothing. Only the fog, thick and impenetrable, swallowing everything in its path. I sat there for a minute, the engine idling, trying to calm myself down. Maybe it was the fog messing with my eyes. That had to be it. I was tired, the visibility was terrible. Probably just an optical illusion, right? I pulled back onto the road, shaking off the weirdness, but my nerves were on edge now. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The road ahead seemed even darker, the fog heavier, like it was closing in around me. That's when I saw them again. Headlights, but this time, they were ahead of me. I hit the brakes hard, the car skidding slightly before coming to a stop. There, just 100 feet or so up the road, were the same headlights, shining through the fog. It was like the car had somehow gotten in front of me. But how? I hadn't seen anyone pass. There was no way. I felt a cold sweat creeped down my neck as I stared at the lights. They weren't moving, just sitting there, waiting. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Everything inside me screamed to turn around, to get the hell out of there. But for some reason, I couldn't move. I inched forward, my foot hovering over the brake. The closer I got, the more my headlights illuminated the space around the other car. But something was off. There was no sound, no engine idling, no tires on the pavement, just silence. When I was close enough to make out the car, my heart nearly stopped. There was no driver, no one inside. The car was empty. I slammed on the brakes again, panicked. That was when the lights blinked off. Just like that, gone. 1 second they were there, and the next, nothing but darkness and fog. I sat there, frozen. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. Was I dreaming? Hallucinating? I tried to reason with myself, but deep down, I knew something was horribly wrong. This wasn't normal. This wasn't something I could explain away. I took a deep breath, threw the car into reverse, and backed up, my eyes darting between the road and the fog-covered nightmare in front of me. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. Then I heard it. A low, distant rumble, like an engine revving up from somewhere deep in the mist. My heart pounded in my chest as I shifted back into drive and floored it. The sound grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was right on top of me. I glanced into the rearview mirror one last time, and there they were, those same headlights racing toward me, only this time, I knew there was no one driving that car, no one behind the wheel, and it was coming for me. I drove as fast as I could, barely able to see the road through the fog, my pulse racing with every second. But no matter how fast I went, the headlights kept closing in, closer and closer, until they were blinding me in the mirror. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the lights were gone. The road was empty, silent. I didn't stop driving until I reached home. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there in the fog that night, it wasn't done with me. I still don't know what I saw or how that car appeared and disappeared like that. But every time I'm on that highway now, and the fog rolls in thick like it did that night, I can feel it watching me, waiting. And I know one day, those headlights will come for me again.
Story 3. The Stranger in the Trunk.
It was late. I'd been driving for hours, with nothing but an empty highway stretching ahead of me and a gas gauge that was barely above empty. I spotted a lone gas station on the side of the road, a run-down place with flickering lights and peeling paint, but it was open. I pulled in, more out of desperation than comfort. The place was deserted. No cars, no people, just a tired-looking cashier inside, nodding off at the counter. I filled up the tank, paid, and went back to my car, grateful to finally be heading home. As I got back on the road, I started to feel a creeping sense of unease, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Maybe it was the silence of the night or the isolation of the highway, but I shook it off. Just a few more hours, I told myself. About 20 minutes later, the silence in the car was broken by a faint sound. Tap, tap, tap. I frowned, glancing around. At first, I thought it was something rattling in the back seat, but the noise was coming from my trunk. The tapping grew louder, rhythmic, like someone or something was knocking, trying to get my attention. My heart rate spiked as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was probably just something I'd thrown in there, shifting around. But the taps turned into scratches, like nails scraping against metal, persistent and unsettling. I pulled over to the shoulder of the road, breathing heavily as I sat there, trying to steady my nerves. The highway was empty, swallowed by darkness on either side, no cars in sight. The thought of getting out and opening that trunk made my skin crawl, but the sound was impossible to ignore now. Steeling myself, I reached into the glove box for my flashlight and got out of the car. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I approached the trunk, the only sound in the stillness of the night. Taking a deep breath, I clicked the flashlight on, aiming it at the trunk as I slowly popped it open. The trunk creaked as it lifted, revealing nothing but darkness inside. I held my breath and leaned in, expecting, well, I didn't know what I expected. A loose piece of luggage, maybe. Something rational. But that's when I saw it. A pair of eyes staring back at me. I stumbled back, flashlight shaking in my hand, as a figure slowly sat up inside my trunk. It was a man, filthy, with hollow, dark eyes and a smile that stretched too wide. He looked at me, unblinking, his eyes shining in the light. "Hello there," he whispered, his voice a hoarse rasp, like he hadn't spoken in days. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How long had he been there? How did he get in? And then it hit me, the gas station. He must have slipped into my trunk while I was paying inside. Before I could react, he climbed out, moving too quickly, his hands reaching for me. I stumbled back, but he was on me in an instant, his filthy fingers gripping my arm as he leaned in close, his breath hot and sour against my face. "Thank you for the ride," he hissed, his lips curling into a sinister grin. Adrenaline kicked in, and I yanked my arm free, scrambling back toward the driver's side door. I managed to slip inside and lock the doors just as he lunged at the window, slamming his fists against the glass, his face twisted with anger. I threw the car into drive and floored it, the engine roaring to life as I sped away, leaving him standing there on the side of the road, his figure growing smaller and smaller in my rearview mirror. My hands were shaking, my heart racing as I drove. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see him chasing after me, but the road was empty. I don't know how long I drove before I finally let myself breathe again, but the image of his eyes, that smile, it's burned into my memory. I still don't know how he got into my trunk or how long he'd been there, waiting, but I'll never forget that face. And every time I'm out on a lonely road, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there somewhere, looking for his next ride.
Story 4. The Road with No End.
I was dead tired. I just wrapped up a long day at work, and the only thing on my mind was getting home, grabbing a quick bite, and collapsing into bed. The drive should have taken 40 minutes, maybe less if I avoided the main highway traffic. So, when I spotted a side road that cut through some backcountry, I figured, why not? A shortcut sounded perfect. The road started off fine, narrow, winding through dense trees with barely any other cars. It was dark, but I didn't mind. The quiet was kind of nice after a chaotic day. But the further I went, the less familiar things started to look. I wasn't worried yet, though. I just assumed I'd merge back onto the main road eventually. Half an hour went by. I hadn't seen a single car, and the road showed no signs of ending. My GPS signal was acting up, the blue dot flickering on the screen like it couldn't figure out where I was. The road was completely straight now, lined with trees on both sides, dense and towering, swallowing all light except for my headlights. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was driving into the middle of nowhere. I tried to check the GPS again, but it gave up completely. the screen going blank. Frustrated, I switched on the radio, hoping for a familiar station to ground me. But all I got was static. I kept hitting the scan button, but nothing came through. Just white noise. A strange chill crawled down my spine as I realized how completely isolated I was. No GPS, no radio, no sign of life. Just me and this endless road. An hour passed, then 2. The road kept stretching on, unbroken, with no intersections, no signs, nothing. Just those same trees, endless and oppressive, pressing in from all sides. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. I didn't want to admit it, but I was starting to feel trapped. The uneasy kind of trapped, like something was deliberately keeping me on this road. And that's when I noticed the landmarks. First, it was a dead tree, its twisted branches bare and reaching out like bony fingers. A few minutes later, I passed an old sign, rusted and unreadable, leaning to one side, and then another dead tree, the exact same one. Same twisted branches, same shadow stretching across the road. My pulse quickened as I realized I was seeing the same things, over and over again. I was going in circles. I slowed down, almost to a crawl, and looked around. There was no turn, no way off the road. Just that same path stretching endlessly ahead of me. My heart began to race, panic gnawing at my chest as I drove forward, watching for any sign that I wasn't just going in one giant loop. But after another 20 minutes, I passed that dead tree again. That same rusted sign. It was as if the road was playing tricks on me, pulling me deeper with every mile. Desperate, I tried to call for help, but there was no signal. I felt completely cut off, stranded in this strange loop with no end. I pushed down on the accelerator, hoping that maybe if I drove fast enough, I'd break through whatever was keeping me trapped here. But the faster I went, the more I felt the weight of the darkness closing in, like I was the only person left in the world. I drove for what felt like hours, my eyes glued to the road, hoping for something, anything that would show me a way out. Then, up ahead, I saw headlights. Another car. Relief washed over me. I flashed my brights, honked, but as I got closer, the other car's lights flickered out. There was no car, just darkness and empty road stretching on forever. Exhausted, defeated, I pulled over, letting my head rest against the steering wheel. I couldn't keep driving. I felt like I was losing my mind. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Maybe if I just waited a little while, daylight would come, and I'd be able to see my way out of this place. But as I sat there, engine idling, I heard it. A faint sound like footsteps, coming from the trees. I glanced up, squinting into the darkness, but there was nothing. Just shadows. The footsteps grew louder, closer, crunching on the gravel behind my car. Heart pounding, I threw the car into drive and hit the gas, speeding down the road, desperate to escape whatever was lurking behind me. But no matter how far I drove, no matter how fast, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, followed by something I couldn't see. The same dead tree appeared again, that same twisted sign. I was back where I started, and that's when it hit me. The road wasn't leading me anywhere. It was keeping me here, holding me in this endless loop. I still don't know how long I drove that night. Eventually, I passed out from exhaustion, my car finally stopping on its own. When I woke up, it was morning, the sun filtering through the trees. The road looked normal, just a simple stretch of country road. I drove out without a hitch, merging onto the main highway like nothing had happened. But every time I drive alone at night, I can't shake the fear that I'll end up on that road again. That one wrong turn will pull me back to that endless loop, where something waits in the darkness, following me, waiting for me to come back.
Story 5. The Last Passenger.
I'd been driving for hours. The late-night shifts were usually quiet, a few passengers here and there, but mostly I spent my time listening to podcasts and counting down the minutes until my shift ended. That night, just as I was about to call it quits, a new ride request popped up. The pickup location was on the edge of town, and the destination, somewhere out in the countryside. I hesitated. It was late, and driving through those winding, empty roads in the dark wasn't exactly my idea of fun. But it was a good fare, and I figured one last trip would make the long night worth it. I pulled up to the pickup point, a desolate street corner with no streetlights. I looked around, wondering if maybe the app had glitched. But then I saw him. A man stepped out from the shadows, tall and thin, wearing an old coat that looked like it had seen better days. He opened the door, slid into the back seat without a word, and simply nodded when I confirmed his destination. From the start, something about him put me on edge. He didn't say a word as I pulled away, just stared out the window, his face barely visible in the dim light. I tried to brush it off. I'd had my share of strange passengers, and he was probably just tired or drunk. A few minutes into the drive, he finally spoke. "Do you enjoy driving strangers around at night?" The question caught me off guard. His voice was low, almost a whisper, and there was something unsettling in his tone. I forced a smile, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "It pays the bills," I replied, trying to sound casual. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I bet you meet a lot of interesting people." "Yeah, I guess you could say that." I tried to keep my tone light, but there was something in his gaze that made me feel like he was studying me, sizing me up. For a few miles, he was silent again, and I focused on the road, counting down the minutes until I could drop him off and get back home. But then he spoke again, his voice cutting through the silence. "You used to take this road all the time, didn't you?" I froze. It was such an odd question, so specific. "What do you mean?" I asked, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "This road," he continued, his eyes fixed on me in the mirror. "You used to come down here every weekend, back when you were younger, back when you still had something to lose." My stomach twisted. I hadn't told him anything about myself, and yet somehow he seemed to know things I hadn't thought about in years. Memories of late-night drives, coming out here with friends, suddenly surfaced, but I kept my voice steady. "You must have me confused with someone else." "No," he said softly, almost to himself. "I never forget a face." The silence between us grew thick, and I felt the tension in the car tighten like a noose. I couldn't bring myself to look at him, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching every movement, every slight tremor in my hands. "You've made mistakes, haven't you?" he whispered. "Things you'd rather forget." My heart pounded in my chest. "Listen, I don't know what you're talking about, but—" He leaned forward, close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. "What was her name?" I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "What? What are you talking about?" "Don't you remember?" he whispered, his voice soft and taunting. "All those years ago, she trusted you." A cold chill ran down my spine as I remembered. There had been someone, an old friend I'd wronged, someone I'd lost touch with. But there was no way he could have known about her. I hadn't told a soul. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Just a passenger." I tried to focus on the road, but every word, every memory he stirred up made it harder to concentrate. I needed to get him out of my car, needed to be far away from whatever nightmare I'd driven into. As we neared his destination, a small, abandoned farmhouse at the end of a long, dirt road, he leaned forward one last time. It's never too late to make things right, you know. Before I could respond, he opened the door and stepped out, disappearing into the darkness without another word. I didn't wait to see where he went. I slammed the door shut, my heart racing as I drove off, desperate to get away. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I could still see him standing there, watching me drive away, his face illuminated by the red glow of my taillights. And, in that moment, I knew I hadn't just picked up any passenger. He was something else, something that knew everything about me, about the choices I'd buried and the regrets I'd tried to forget. And as I drove back down that empty road, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that one day I'd see him again, and next time he'd be waiting for me.
Night drives can feel peaceful, but they can also bring out the strangest and most frightening experiences. Whether it's a phantom hitchhiker or strange lights in the sky, the dark seems to invite the unknown. Thanks for watching, and remember, next time you're out on a lonely road, you might not be as alone as you think. Be sure to check out our other horror story videos for more scares. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one.